What's up, guys? Today I had on psychiatrist, speaker, and writer Dr. Will Siu. Will has a private practice in Los Angeles where he treats patients who have mood swings, PTSD, anxiety disorders, depression, and much more with the help of psychedelics. He's been featured as a speaker in Gweneth Paltrow's Goop wellness program and has an important voice within the realm of psychedelic-assisted humanity and healing. Will grew up in California, went to med school at UCLA, completed a doctoral degree at the University of Oxford, and later joined the faculty at Harvard Medical School. Even through all of these external accomplishments, Will found himself depressed and suicidal until he discovered the power of psychedelics. On the pod, we talked about how much he had to unlearn what he learned in school on his journey to following his own path as a therapist, as the therapist that he is today, the human that he embodies himself as today. Will has helped countless people who have had severe mental disorders, and he uses the inner healer of oneself to improve the general well-being of his patients. This was a great episode, guys. We talked all things psychedelics, returning to one's wholeness, finding your soul purpose, and Will's viewpoint on quote-unquote conscious leadership and business from a macro standpoint. If you like this episode, guys, please share it with a homie, tag me on social, and definitely subscribe. It means the world to me. Enjoy the show. Will, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad we finally, made it happen.
I'm super excited to have you on. I know you've been traveling. You were just in Peru. I'm pretty jealous about that. I know it's a very just sort of connected place to nature. And what was your experience like there?
Well, it's always hard to summarize an ayahuasca retreat into anything short, but I would say it was incredibly profound and powerful. And I was saying before we started recording, I feel like I got everything that I asked for and more, which I don't actually say every time.
That's amazing.
One of these, so it was a very unique experience.
From a standpoint of your intention that you went in it with, you feel like you came out with particular answers that you were looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say they're necessarily narrative answers. I've been working a lot on embodiment and kind of reassociation from physical dissociation that I've experienced. I realize I experienced in recent years all of my life. And so really just coming back more into my body and sensations and feelings even deeper. So yeah, it was less of like storyline and connecting memories and more of just reconnecting to my body and experiencing what was keeping me from that. So
That's super interesting. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Not necessarily. I mean, we'll end up getting into it a little bit after.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, I mean, because I'll say a little bit is just, I think part of the healing journey or the wholeness journey is about sort of looking at, stories, memories, traumas of things that have happened. But I also think the body really is, a whole aspect of healing, reconnecting to the body, getting familiar to the body, using, the sensation and emotions that we connect to as sort of gauges and beacons of our journey, which I think, I don't hear talked about too much. And I think there's probably many reasons why not. I think it's just, people are still figuring out sort of what psychedelics are about to them. And so I sort of think of it as that this stuff will start unfolding more in the coming years. So.
Well, I'm definitely going to ask you a little bit more about that because I'm super interested in it because I am just personally with the aspect of feeling in my body. But I actually didn't start the show how I always do, but I'm going to go back to it. I always ask my guests, what was your last oh shit moment? What is the first thing that comes to mind when I'm like, what was your last oh shit moment?
I mean, probably, since we're talking about this ayahuasca retreat in Peru, I mean, I think there's always an oh shit moment after you drink ayahuasca and you're sort of waiting for the experience to come. Yeah. And I would say in particular, there was during the fourth ceremony, most places allow you to come up for seconds if you want. And I'm not someone that tends to do that. I sort of stick to the first dose I take and that's it. But like on the fourth ceremony, it was definitely it needed to happen. And so, yeah, usually I go back and forth and, should I take this much or this much? But I wasn't so much in my head overall this retreat. And so I kind of just went up and took, a second significant dose. And then once, after sitting with it for a minute or two, then I was like, oh shit, like it's probably going to get real. And it did.
That's a solid one, dude. That's a real good, oh shit. Well, just from a basic standpoint, why does healing have to happen?
Well, I actually don't think it has to happen.
Okay.
I think it's a choice, and when I think of healing, the word I think of more and more lately is wholeness. I think traditionally, being trained in the Western system, I'm a medical doctor as a psychiatrist, it really in some ways comes from a Freudian standpoint and traditional psychotherapy, which is about there's a problem and then we need to fix it. There's a diagnosis and there's a treatment. And I really started realizing, early on in my psychiatry training about 10 years ago that didn't really seem to fit. And then I started, I was atheist at that time. I hadn't read any of spiritual teachings weren't anything I was into, Krishnamurti, Alan Watts, none of that was on my radar before. Psychedelics weren't on my radar. I hadn't taken any psychedelics 10 years ago. And then I started working more with psychedelics, learning about Stan Grof was really probably the first major person, and then learning about the work of Krishnamurti and then Gabor Mate. And then, seeing the seeing the human journey more of one of like transformation and evolution and growth, and not seeing it as something wrong we have to fix, but just sort of further, like I said, transformation, evolution, just change and less about there being this problem we need to fix, and instead it just being, change. And, one thing that I think is very, very important, I think it's a wonderful part of the human experience is free will, so I think that all these things, many, many things are available to us, but we choose them. And so I think there's people that go through this journey and don't choose to, pursue things that are going to expand them, to bring them more, to be more whole. And I don't necessarily think that that's a wrong thing. I just don't think it's for everybody. So
that's got to be great for you to be able to fully embody that free will with your name on it.
Yeah, it has come to mind once or twice.
So, Will, you do have a PhD and you did a residency at Harvard in the psychiatric department. How much of what you learned did you have to unlearn, to become the type of healer that you are? If we can continue to use that word healer in general, do you feel like you had to unlearn a lot?
I would say, because I think, actually, I just realized I felt off, and it's because I don't have my bracelet on. I usually have my morning routine of putting on my jewelry. So I was like, something's missing here. So I'll put on this bracelet.
Love that. I clearly I have my things going on.
I think certainly, almost everything I think that I learned in my training, I had to unlearn.
Wow.
But even further back to that, it started, I think, the way I sort of think about this, again, healing, transformation, wholeness journey, I've thought about this metaphor with a prism in recent years where, I think when we're born, we're kind of like this clear prism and light comes into the prism, and then there's this emanation, this spectrum of light that comes out, and I think that of that, spectrum of light that comes out is unique to every single human that lives and has ever lived and will ever live, and I think that is, our potential expression of ourselves during this life. And, I think that then narratives come, right? Stories about ourselves, stories of what we can be or what we can't be or what we should be or what we shouldn't be, which for me came through, family, culture. Certainly religion played a big role. I was raised Jehovah's Witness. And so, the way I start thinking of that is we start putting gunk on our prism, or we start putting films on our prism, and we start saying, oh, my red is too bright, I want it to look like this, or I want to get rid of the blue, or I don't have any green, I want to make that come out. But we start perturbing what is our natural prism and emanation, right? And if I think of that analogy, also the reason I like the analogy of the prism is because if you start covering a prism and messing with it, it's going to hold the light, right? So, and parts of it may heat up. Some of the light may get, diffracted into different pieces. And to me, that is like pain and suffering, which is this holding back of what we naturally want to be emanating, right? Which is a very different perspective than Western medicine, which says, oh, these suffering, these pain, these symptoms are something to be gotten rid of, versus like when I think of the prism being perturbed, it's figuring out why it's being perturbed and almost allowing it freedom, or not almost, allowing it freedom to just express, and to me, that is wholeness and healing. And so, where I've had to sort of unlearn, as you said, a lot of the stuff that I was taught in medicine, it was really an unlearning of much more than that. It's of society, culture, family, religion,
right,
all of these things. And so I started realizing that medicine was no different. It was just another set of, teachings that I had to unlearn that seemed very solidified, right? And we have buildings and institutions and marble buildings at that, at Harvard, that make it seem as if these things are real and fundamental and unquestionable. And so it's sort of like, in some ways, being in the system had its challenges to not believe it, but it's also given me a lot of comfort because, I put so much time and energy into it. And I went, to what are considered some of the best places for this. And then once I really started trusting myself, I had the confidence to then be like, this is not the way it works. You know? And so, it's been quite the journey. I mean, it wasn't that easy. Certainly when I was going through it, I would double, question myself and thought I was going crazy more than one time.
I can only imagine. I love, Will, the analogy with the prism. I actually have a prism tattooed on my back with light going through it. To me, like a long time ago, I was obsessed with the aspect of white light going through a prism and all of the different colors being represented inside of white light. And to me, that meant potentiality, the potential to really be able to become who you want to become, who you're supposed to become. And essentially, in a different word of saying is, being able to reach that wholeness of yours. But that's sort of just interesting with the prism. But I was obsessed with it at a young age.
Yeah, you're the first person that I've shared that story with that says they have a connection to it and have certainly the first prism tattoo I've.
I love that. That's great. So, Will, for somebody who is just, to be honest, my audience is completely mixed, right? So there's going to be people that are super, not super knowledgeable, but totally down with sort of the concepts of using psychedelics for healing. And then some are like, I've never even heard of it or just starting to hear about it. And it's kind of like becoming buzzwordy and all that. So just basic, why and how can psychedelics be used for healing trauma? Why is it that people are able to access different layers through it versus traditional therapy?
Well, I noticed you said the word trauma, which we could talk about separately if that's the question you want to ask, because I think healing and wholeness and finding that with psychedelics is different than healing trauma with it. Okay. It's related, but it's a little bit different.
Okay.
So, but overall, when I think of psychedelics, I think about, my favorite definition of them is that of Stan Grof's, which he calls them non-specific amplifiers of the unconscious. And I think that's a really helpful and accurate way to start, right? Meaning they're just
non-specific amplifiers of the unconscious.
Yep.
Got it.
And so they simply open us up to things that are out of our awareness in a normal day. So feelings, that could be emotions, that could be memories, right? And they just make it available, right? It doesn't mean that by experiencing these things that we become more whole or that we feel better. They're just providing the experiences or access to the experiences. And sometimes we have those experiences and we feel worse, right? So it sort of, I think his definition accurately sort of signifies how there's simply a tool. There's a tool. It's a function that it provides, and then there's something that then we choose sort of what to do with it, or we can choose ahead of time whether to set ourselves up with someone helping to guide us, or putting ourselves in situations where, we can potentially maximize or make be felt the most supported as we experience these things. And so that brings up the thought about unconscious. So why is anything unconscious, right?
Hey guys, I just want to remind you, if you want to find more content like this, you can visit sebastiannaum.com. That's Sebastian, Naum.com. You can also get a ton of other marketing resources from myself and my agencies, ranging from SEO to social media, influencer marketing, branding, web development, and more. Again, that's sebastiannaum.com. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the show.
If we look at the traditional psychology realm, which has, again, it's not that medicine and psychology are all wrong. This is one of the things it gets right. So we suppress things, we push things aside because they're painful. And we usually do that when we're young and we don't have a choice, right? Because, it's like perhaps we tried bringing up the issue with a parent and the parents doubled down, or we were so restricted by religion that we had no choice as children. So then we push these away so we're not suffering sort of all day, every day. And so, the other things that can help, or that aid this pushing down things into the unconscious, is things like morals, right? What's right, what's wrong, what kind of thoughts are we allowed to have or not? Whether those are violent thoughts, sexual thoughts, but another set is also in the realm of what we would call non-ordinary or spiritual. Like kids often, see things or hear things or talk to things that adults would say are not real or are not there in the Western culture, right? And so those are the things that we can push away, right? Where in other cultures, talking to spirits or talking to dead relatives, seeing them is very normal. And those things actually don't get pushed down. So, and then another set would be feelings and emotions, right? Boys don't cry, men shouldn't, feel certain emotions, women shouldn't feel certain emotions. And so there's a huge mixture of things that gets pushed into the unconscious. And so, when we take a psychedelic, we don't know what's going to come up. And so when thinking about healing in this word wholeness, it's like bringing all of these things that we have sort of compartmentalized or put separately, and attempting to then create a more complete version of who we always were. And then we can get into like the different psychedelics, because I think the different psychedelics do this opening differently, and they can open up different aspects of what's been pushed down uniquely depending which one it is. But that's getting a little bit ahead, I think.
Yeah, we'll get into that. Yeah. And Will, what was your very first psychedelic experience like?
Yeah, it was
Mine was very unconscious, like just truthfully, not much intention there. It was like in college, freshman year, just like wanted to do it to have fun. And by the way, still had a beautiful, I had the worst time of my life, which was followed by an incredibly beautiful sort of download per se of like oneness and love. And it was like, that was mine. But what was yours like the very first time?
Mine occurred relatively late in my life. I was 33, if I remember, or 34. Okay. I at that time did not, have long hair, piercings, jewelry, or anything. I was a very conservative doctor, in Boston, working at Harvard. And at that time I was also atheist. And so and having also the Jehovah's Witness background, even though I stopped going to church in my early teens. There was this history that these were dangerous and that these were scary, and that, they could take you to hell and expose you to dangerous spirits and that sort of a thing. But so my first psychedelic was this one called NNDMT, which was a smoked version of I'd say arguably the most powerful psychedelic you can take. It's the same active ingredient that's in ayahuasca, except that it all happens very, very quickly
Very quickly, right? What are we talking,
less
like
than a
20
minute.
minutes?
I mean, it hits in less than a minute for sure. And the peak of it probably is about 2 to 3 minutes in.
Got it.
But and how it came about for me is that I was in this, what I would call my second rock bottom of my life. First being when my dad died about 5-6 years before that. But this was sort of a second rock bottom where I had sort of hit another period of depression, and I'd also been feeling suicidal. But by then I had tried numerous antidepressants, I had tried ADHD medications, I had tried therapy, and I was feeling really, really miserable. And, I was like, I'm at the best institution in the world, arguably, for this, and I'm not getting any better. And my patients aren't really getting any better. And so it was a time where I was like, I was realizing, I'm like, did I waste my entire life? Was I really not thoughtful about what I wanted to go into for work? By then I had 15 years after high school straight of education. And I was like, I was really feeling like I did I screw this all up? And so I thought about dropping out, and it just happened to be synchronistically at the same time my childhood best friend, he started college. So he was different than me. Then after high school, he played in a band. He was a blue collar laborer. And but then the 2008-2009 financial crisis hit, and then he decided to go to school. So he was in his first year of college when I was going through this, and his physics tutor introduced him to DMT. And so for months and months, he was telling me about DMT, telling me to read about it, telling me to watch these Terrence McKenna videos. And I didn't buy it for months. I was just like, he's crazy, he's doing drugs. I was actually pretty worried about him. And but eventually he got me to, he was like, no, he's like, Will, he's like, look this up. They used to do research on this, and publish research on these substances. And I was like, and I went to prove him wrong. Actually, I was kind of being cocky. I was like, I'm going to show you that you're wrong. I ended up doing a search on our, PubMed system. And I was like, oh my God, there are tons of researchers that used to study this, and there's some that are doing it now. And so that was the first time I was actually like, wow, maybe there's something to this, and this is long before Michael Pollan wrote a book. So there wasn't really much talk around this stuff. And so eventually I flew home to California on vacation. That's where I grew up, and that's where my friend lived. And then we all got set up, and he, prepared the pipe and the DMT. But I actually chickened out, and I couldn't do it. And I flew back to Boston. And it took another few months of just feeling worse and worse and worse, to where I was like, you know what, like, I'm going to go back and do this. I don't care if it kills me. I don't care if, my life is so miserable, it doesn't matter anyway. So I was kind of in this like
true rock bottom, really.
Yeah. I was just like, I've got nothing to lose, basically.
Wow.
And so, it was a powerful experience, and there's a few things that I always remember from it, shortly after taking it, which were meaningful to me. I always get the sensation that it was warm. And significantly, it was waiting for me. And again, I was not a spiritual person at all, not a religious person all the time. And the other thought that came is I've been there before. And it wasn't, again, a thought, it was an experience. I was like, I have experienced that before. And so, can I say that there was any, day-to-day lasting healing from that? Probably not. But it was almost like having a felt experience that there was something more, and that, there was something worth continuing to live for. And I didn't quite know what that path was going to look like, but it was at least almost like a totem moment that of hope that I got.
Well, I would say that's pretty lasting in the sense of,
fair enough. But,
powerful,
meaning
right?
Day to day, I was still feeling depressed and
okay,
and things. It's just I had some hope that was
got it. Interesting.
introduced to me because of that.
How important do you think, Will, is it for healers, therapists, psychiatrists to heal their own stuff, to really look inward, to heal trauma? I know we haven't talked specifically about trauma yet, but how important is it for them to be good healers, to be good therapists, to be good psychiatrists, to do the work themselves?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if doing the work or healing oneself is ever done,
Right.
If it is, I'm not certainly one of those people.
Yeah.
But I think one has to have done enough of it. I do think that there are a lot of people out there right now putting themselves in positions of being a healer that are not ready for it, and I think that, certainly I, for a long time, I was thrown in this position of being a doctor and a healer, probably, and I don't know if really, my first sort of few patients in my training really benefited from working together. I'm pretty certain I didn't hurt them, but definitely, I wasn't ready, and I think that, it's interesting what we're seeing right now, especially in the last couple of years, where psychedelics, went from this thing, especially doing underground work, where it was all kind of in a whisper to people, pretty openly advertising on social media that they're psychedelic guides, and the thing is, when I think back to other cultures, certain indigenous cultures, where there was more community, families stayed together, there was more of a longitudinal relationship with the community, versus now, where we move for college, we leave our families, we like move all the time. Where there was always elders in the community. There was kids were raised around their aunts and uncles and grandmas and grandpas, and parents had support, and there was a system to it, and there was rites of passage, and so there this idea of elders and healers, which I kind of I think overlap some, is something that I think about when you ask about this, because I think that we can only generally take someone so far in their own path, as far as we've really learned or understood ourselves, and I would say not understand from reading, but understand from our experience of life, our own experience of working through things. And so, I would say that there's something, there's probably some amount, that we've done enough of our own healing that we can really be there for others. So.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Will, on my pod, I talk a lot about conscious leadership and business and conscious brands and all of these things. And so a lot of what we're talking about today really is mental health and being able to show up as a more whole human. Do you think psychedelics can be used in an approach to transform like a business owner or leader into a more conscious business owner, into a more conscious leader?
What do you mean by the word conscious? I'm curious.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of talk about what conscious means in this aspect and how it's used. We can say more conscientious, but conscious being more from a more aware leader, a leader that is going to look at all stakeholders involved in the company, going to consider the environment, how it's affecting the environment, his or her product that they're creating, what the company culture is like, right, in terms of their employees, who they're leading. Just overall, as all stakeholders involved, the conscious leader is going to consider all stakeholders involved and use business as a force for good, not just as a means to make money.
Well, I mean, I certainly think, that, I don't know, I've sort of thought that and it's kind of happening, that psychedelics are just sort of percolating into culture. I don't think psychedelics should have and should ever just be restricted to healing and to therapists and psychiatrists. I think of them just as tools of expanding our awareness of the vastness of the human experience, and I think that, so, meaning I think anyone, regardless of what their profession is, could have, ongoing awareness and expansion of, I'd say most importantly, themselves, and their history, what motivates them, what has motivated them, perhaps in a way that is not, in service and alignment to their most, to their soul, to their purpose, their real purpose, and I think that, that would certainly be the case with people in business, but I hesitate to say, it's specific to any profession or industry, but
Sure.
I think that it would be, it's important to also say to continue to question oneself, because I think that, these narratives, again, these stories that come on from culture, from family, from religion, from current morality, ethics, are sort of endless. And so, we can remove 2, 3, 4 of these layers, or most of them, and then think all of a sudden that we see completely clearly, and I think it's important to keep that, the ongoing openness that we still may be clouded, and we still may be, it's important to continue to reassess ourselves, I would say, constantly.
On that theme of using business as force for good and business in general, I think that, when leaders have those experiences, it could really change how they show up. And that's why it can change how they show up as leaders. It can even change their business models and cause them to change what they're doing and reassess, like you said. Have you personally worked with any truly corporate people, overachievers, people that are really just, kind of go-getters? Is there like a psychedelic of choice that you think that you like to work with when you're working with those type of people that maybe coming in with, they're not very spiritual already, they're not very open to it, they're just kind of stressed out, they're burnt out, right? And maybe, they are very kind of like sort of intense corporate overachiever type people. Is there something that have you had that experience with people like that yourself?
I have, but also say, a little bit more to what we're just talking about, which I've seen people that are entrepreneurs that end up, again, there isn't this, it's actually probably less common, I would say, these days, that someone does a psychedelic, even in a guided experience, and ends up in a more aligned, open, expansive, thoughtful, you use the word good, I don't use that often, but that relates to a lot of people, and that actually they end up becoming more effective capitalists, and they do end up convincing themselves that of something that seems very misaligned. And especially, I've seen groups sometimes of entrepreneurs do retreats together. And more often than not, when I hear about these, it actually seems that there's almost a reinforcement of, some approaches to work that are, not so, that are less thoughtful about other people, that are less thoughtful about the collective. Because if you think about, there's reasons why we carry the stories that we carry and do the things that we do. And there's going to be resistance to those ways of life falling away, really saying, maybe me doing anything at scale doesn't make any sense, because, that's not really allowing, the more local business people to do something. Maybe I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing at all. But if that would be very, that'd be equivalent of me at the time when I was like, maybe I shouldn't be doing medicine at all. Maybe I should drop out, which took a lot of self-reflection and questioning of myself, but it's a very painful thing to do. It's much easier to find a reason in the mind to continue to reinforce what we're doing. And so I've seen some of these, high-end, expensive retreats, and again, where it's entrepreneurs getting together, and I've seen many times where the entrepreneurs then feel like even more sort of supported and justified to continue to be, very extractive in the way that they work, and it's because there's group mentality of like, okay, so you get this, a bunch of people, who are struggling with the same thing, that end up reinforcing their own struggles in the end, and actually
interesting
are less aware, I would say, of
interesting
the mode of how they're working.
I want to ask you, because you said effective, you used the word effective capitalism. And so, for example, I'm on the board of Conscious Capitalism Los Angeles, right? So this is an organization, it's a worldwide organization that is meant to promote using business as a force for good. And I know good is kind of a generalistic term, but essentially conscious capitalism being one where profits are not the sort of the end, right? They're not the end goal, right? That business is being used to help communities, to help curb global warming, to help the environment, all of those things. So when you said effective capitalism in that sense, you're saying that you've seen where entrepreneurs and leaders sort of can get together and actually do psychedelics, but sort of having a sort of continue their traditional capitalistic ways, or bad capitalism, just to give it a simple word. And that's what you meant by that?
I mean, I'm not sure if I can't remember saying effective capitalism. If I said that, I don't think I made a mistake. I'm not sure if I mean, again, I don't even know what the real, if there is an agreed upon definition of capitalism, but my overall feeling is I'm not even sure if capitalism is something that is can be something that is helpful or good, or because I just think that, if we think about, most again, traditional indigenous cultures lived in groups of about 200, and everyone had a role. Everyone had, played a role. The people who clean, the plumbers, everyone was significant, and I think importantly, people knew each other. Right? You lived together. You wouldn't. Nowadays you have people who have had jobs for a long time, have played important roles in companies for a long time, and they lose their job because of a decision that's made on another continent. And to me, that I don't know if there's a really a good or effective way of doing that at all. Is it that we're trying to do too much? Or you're saying, oh, you said something, I can't remember exactly what you said, but it's like, oh, okay, like, this group is trying to help this group, or they're going to help people in the poor communities, or the people of color community. And it's like, who's to say anyone, like, the Bill Gateses or anyone should even be trying to do that? Who says that that's your problem to solve? How about just allowing them and having more, instead of these larger companies accumulating money and then saying, oh, I'm going to do something with this. How about just saying, oh, let's use that to just pay the people more and let them sort it out? Because there's this bigness. Everyone wants to have an impact, and it's quote and good. They want to have a good impact, but it's like, it's still this like scale thing where people are like, oh, I want to, impact thousands of people or millions of people with my idea or my product. And to me, even that's like, I think, missing the point of people's autonomy, and so it's still, maybe moving from, oh, I want to make this amount of money, to then saying, oh, I want to have this amount of impact. But even just saying that sometimes, oh, I even want to have this amount of impact on this many people, could still be just a perturbation of this thing of, I am so this, and I want to create this thing, and so, yeah, I'm not sure if
I think that's a really, really
there's an
interesting
effective
topic.
capitalism.
It really is an interesting topic. Even in books that I've read about conscious capitalism, it actually talks a lot about sort of the just giving and how negative giving can be, as opposed to enabling, right? And I think that's super interesting. Like you said, people, maybe a particular area that is in need, and just going there and dropping a ton of stuff, right? Donating a ton of stuff, as opposed to enabling skills, to allow people to essentially be able to feel valuable, or doing something that matters for their communities, in that sense. So I think it's like a very interesting topic.
Yeah, but even enabling, when I think of enabling, that still has the potential to, again, be this self-serving perturbation. When I think about, say, things in the US, we have this stuff, I don't know, these like international scholarships. We have like the Fogarty fellowships and all these things of, going to the poor areas, going to the undeveloped countries, like let's teach them English, let's help them start businesses. And it's like, we're basically saying, let's go over there, like by teaching them English, we're saying, let's have them buy in more into Western culture. Now they'll be able to speak the language of capitalism. Now they'll be able to read the ads on social media. Now they'll be able to understand our explanations of our products more. Having them, let's make them more entrepreneurial. That's still instilling that they're somehow behind for not having more of an entrepreneurial mindset. Like that, meaning like, do we even need that? Like, do they even need that? Based on our scale of what is success and what is good and what is modern and where people should be evolving to. But that's still very much imparting our system on another people, and so I don't know, those are some of the thoughts that come to mind for me.
It's really interesting. I was reading a study on just happiness a couple of years ago, and seeing that one of the places in the world with the most amount of people reporting happiness is in Brazil. And they were seeing that the level of poverties are massive in Brazil. So the poverty and happiness wasn't correlating necessarily in that sense of, unhappiness with poverty. And a lot of the things they were finding was that one of the things that they did the most was dance, and sort of dancing and dancing with their communities,
Yeah.
and how much happiness they had from that. And it was completely uncorrelated to
Yeah.
money. You know,
Yeah. And, and that I'll go back to your other question. So yeah, I mean, I've worked with some of the most famous people in the world, some of the wealthiest people in the world, some of the most powerful people in the world. And I'd say it easily correlates, with less happiness. The lives that these people are living in. We're talking billionaires and
yeah,
people on all the covers of the magazines and in all the movies.
yeah,
So it's, it's interesting because it's just reinforced kind of a knowing that I've had before that, that
interesting.
it's, again, I I guess, again, capitalism, I don't know quite what it means, but again, I don't know if they're really, if we're doing I think we need to start scaling back, and I think we need to start just focusing on community and not trying to do so much.
Do you feel the same if we take it to extremes then, and we talk about, okay, somebody who was born in a incredibly poor village of India, just to throw something out there, with no access to clean water, basic necessities for a decent human experience from a physical standpoint. Do you feel that even those types of communities shouldn't receive help and they should figure it out on their own?
No, I mean, and I wasn't saying to help or figuring things out on our own. I mean, but one would say that those communities at this point exist not because they were allowed to evolve on their own. If you're talking about India, it's like, the British, when they went there and they extracted most of the wealth and the resources from that country, and then imparted a lot of their own ways of governing, and then they left. Right. So those slums weren't there, right, in Mumbai before the British got there, so it's not as if that was their natural evolution. Right. They lived a very, very different life before the British arrived. And so, I think that I do think that the basics, if people want to try to help others have the basics, I think that there's room there, where I would say, it's food, clothing, shelter. And I would say a fourth one that I don't get heard talked about. It's usually for food, clothing, shelter that you hear. But fourth, I think as important is the ability to express yourself. I think that, and that's one thing, and to express oneself uniquely, right, and authentically and freely. And I think that's one it's interesting because, when you said the word poor, and I think now I don't think of the word, I always want to know what someone's talking about. Poor what? So poor in terms of resources, but most people in India are much richer in their interpersonal connectedness, right? And they're much richer in their community and their connection with their families, where that's where I see in the Western world a tremendous amount of material wealth. And there's a lot of interpersonal poverty. There's love poverty. There's and that's the thing that I think I don't hear talked about very often. That and when we have that, we are much less focused on the amount that we create, the impact that we have, and all these other things. And I think that if people focused more on their interpersonal richness and their safety and lovingness in their life, they just seem to direct less energy towards all of these outside things that they think they need to do.
Interpersonal poverty, man. That's the real pandemic of the Western culture. Yeah. That's really, I love hearing that. And yeah, that's true. There is a lot of that. So switching back into psychedelic talk here, Will, there's so much talk about microdosing, and it's become, sort of like cool and popular, and there's so much around it enhancing creativity, and there's just a lot around it. What's the 101 on microdosing?
Yeah, again, I just go back to non-specific amplifiers of the unconscious. So we can take psychedelics and they open up a large volume and intensity, and perhaps to the point where we can't even move sometimes. And then we can take smaller amounts, So, I mean, I don't even like microdosing at this point. Most of, originally the definition of microdosing was taking something that was subperceptible, so that it's an amount that you wouldn't even feel, which is not what most people are doing when they say they're microdosing these days. So people are just taking smaller doses of psychedelics, right? So, and could it enhance creativity? Again, it depends on the person. And again, it's just unlocking something. And so I don't believe anything that I've seen or read where it says that, just taking it alone every 2 days is going to just lead to some positiveness. I think it's going to depend
Okay.
on the day. And I've, again, experienced it myself for people that I know,
Yeah.
that some days it can be very uplifting and energetic, and some days it can help creativity, and sometimes it enhances that intense feeling of anxiety in our chest, and
That's what I
sometimes
was going to ask you. Yeah, in
it
regards to
you
anxiety. Yeah.
know it can increase rumination. So it's just bringing up stuff that we're not
Mm,
aware of. And so um
yeah.
and I think that that's not a bad thing. I think that in some ways microdosing, depending how it's used in the intention, can actually be a helpful thing, because it can open things up in relationship to another person.
Yeah.
People certainly not in the creativity entrepreneurial area that want to do healing work, often, especially men, are wanting big experiences. And how many cups of ayahuasca did you drink? And what did you see? What were the visuals that you saw? And but you could also do microdosing with a partner who you're struggling with, and saying, okay, well, we're going to Sunday evening set aside our phones. We're not going to talk, no small talk for 4 hours. And let's take a small dose of mushrooms, and let's sit here and let's talk about, what we're struggling with. Or, sometimes some of my patients will come in and they will have microdosed before they come and see me, because if they have trouble connecting to their emotions or to their authenticity, or some feelings or memories, sometimes taking a small amount allows them to come in and see me and open up more. So, yeah, I would just say, I would think of it more as not a separate thing from taking a psychedelic. It's just taking a smaller dose is going to have a different
Got it.
impact than taking a higher
Yeah.
dose.
Yeah. Well, how do you feel about sort of this wide use of recreational mushroom use for partying or a night out? It seems like it's become a lot more normalized because of sort of the higher acceptance in the medical field, in a sense, or whether or not that's correlated. How do you feel about that side of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, psychedelics to have fun and to open up, I think are great. I think that, they should not just be, again, restricted to the realm of healing and therapy and medicine. And, the only issue I would have is if people are mistaking that for healing, and again, sometimes having more fun and pleasure is certainly a healing experience. But
Yeah.
if that's the only way it's thought of to use these, I think then that's where, perhaps it's being limited. So yeah, but I think,
Yeah.
yeah, as long as I think we are not being harmful to other people, I think we should have the freedom to explore our consciousness,
Sure.
however we
Yeah.
like.
Well, I constantly hear from friends, acquaintances, all kinds of people where they basically come back and they'll glorify a very heavy, deep psychedelic experience, but admittedly, um, seem to not really be integrating the learnings that came from what has come up. And obviously, I find it to be so important to integrate the learnings. Otherwise, what's the point, right? So how much do you feel like, if we had to put a percentage of importance in the psychedelic experience itself versus integrating the learnings that came from it, or integrating the downloads that came from it? Is it like it's 50% doing it and 50% the integration and the work, or it's like 90-10, or like if you had to throw something out there, how do you feel about that aspect?
Yeah, integration brings up a whole, that's also become a buzzword, I feel like, these days. So, I mean, maybe to illustrate the point, I would say it's about 1/3 the experience, 1/3 what you do with it after. But, the 1/3 that I would say is not talked about often is the 1/3 of what you're doing before you even take it to begin with. Because
Okay.
I think that, if we're thinking of our journeys overall as this, again, wanting to become more whole, trying to see what's cluttering our prism to begin with, and we're already working on that. I would say that to me, when I work with my clients, like, the integration, or again, what people use as that word of what they're working on after, is no different than what we're working on before.
Mm,
It's just we have a solid idea of what they're working on before they ever take a psychedelic to begin with. And so
mm,
it ends up becoming more just the experience itself is just more of this part of this longitudinal process that they're undergoing. And it's less about taking it and after. It's just honoring the entire journey. And I think if we're looking at it that way, all parts are important.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The before is so interesting. The intention going into it, the work that you're doing before. You mentioned that when you went to Peru just now, you feel like you essentially you got what you wanted because you probably had a lot of work prior to it and what you were.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had a lot of clarity of what I was seeking before.
Yeah.
And I don't think, I like to say that psychedelics are neither sufficient nor necessary for healing. So I really don't believe that they are, but I think coupled with, the right help, the right approach, that they're the most powerful tools that we have. And so, I really don't think that they're necessary. And so I think that, I think the places they really help is if we have a solid sense of what we're working on, where we're stuck, what patterns we're repeating, and then we can add to it. Like we need a bit of help, but we have a good sense of where we are and where we want to go. I think that's where we see the sort of maximal benefit from it versus just taking them.
Yeah. You kind of just answered a question that I wanted to ask you because, with ayahuasca, it's said that you should really feel called to do it. And, I was going to ask you if you felt that in general with psychedelics, do you think that pretty much everyone should approach it as something that they feel called to do it? Or do you think it's something that like everyone should try, no matter what, and it could really help anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly.
Kind of a mixed question.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly would never say everyone should try it, and I don't think that that's the case. It's an easy answer, but no, I mean, the word "called" also is another one. I don't know quite what that means. I think in the wellness spiritual world, people use that word all the time, and I don't know what that means. I'm called to this or called to that. I mean, I think that, I think
perhaps it's having a yearning or a sort of a deeper knowing feeling that you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Yeah, I think again, having some, significant awareness or desire or something that we're looking for. Again, even if that's fun, I think to have a reason to do it and to have like a clear reason, I would say is probably a good idea instead of just having, just taking it out of nowhere, I suppose. But yeah.
Right. Well, there are many great thinkers, musicians, and scientists that have partly given credit to LSD to their success. Do you feel that there could be potentially more breakthroughs scientifically or more creative music happening if psychedelics were even more regularized in the workplace and things like that? Is that even like a possibility, or is that like a just sort of an out there sort of concept? Or
yeah, no, I think certainly, again, these expand our awareness, our consciousness. So, I mean, even MAPS, the nonprofit. So now there's like MAPS. So for those that don't know, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, which is really leading the charge. And so the nonprofit arm of them, which is run by the founder, Rick Doblin, they actually have it's in their sort of, their employee manual that they're allowed to be high at work. As long as it's not getting in the way of their work. And it's also saying, honoring that it may even be helpful to their work to take psychedelics. And so I think it's a nice example of an organization that is open to, these substances being, potentially helpful for, creativity and in the workplace. So,
yeah. Will, we've seen antidepressants, SSRIs, and a lot of mood regulating drugs be very addictive, incredibly addictive. Do you think that MDMA, ketamine, or other psychedelics can be addictive when being used to, with depression, for example, or something like that?
Yeah, so addiction is a very specific word for me. So I think, can they be abused? Can they be used to escape? I would say yes, that's true of all psychedelics. I'd say ketamine specifically has the addictive potential, though, in the classic way that we think of it with alcohol, cocaine, opiates, benzos, and other things.
So more from a physical dependency type addiction.
Yeah, I think ketamine definitely has that potential, and psychological addiction as well.
Okay.
So where the others, not so much.
Got it. Well, I really want to acknowledge you for pushing through all those years, particularly back in the day when you had sort of this calling and you had to follow, your sole purpose, and you were in Harvard and you had probably so many naysayers, and there's all this internal dissonance of what am I doing? Like, am I crazy?
Yeah.
I really want to acknowledge you for that.
Thank you.
Will, yeah. Will, do you see the entire country accepting psychedelic assisted therapy at some point in our lifetime?
I do think the decriminalization movement, we're already seeing it happening in some
Yeah.
states and many cities. So I think I foresee that happening,
Yeah.
probably pretty widely in the next 10 to 15 years. So, yeah.
Right on. Well, before I let you go, I want to ask you, what do you think are two traits that a conscious leader must embody? And you can give conscious whatever definition you'd like to give.
Yeah, I think being self-critical, I think, is very important, and like looking at ourselves, and I would even dare say judging ourselves. I think being
Really?
self-critical about what we've done, and if it's in light of wanting to be different, but I think of self-criticism as different as self-hatred. I don't think it should be self-loathing and imparting a lot of guilt and hatred. So I think, healthy, sometimes what I see in the entrepreneurial coaching realm is almost like this, like, keep going, like everything, happens for reasons, and keep pushing. And I do think it's worthwhile to be able to be self-reflective and even self-critical.
There's probably a fine line there, right? I mean, I
Absolutely
call
a fine
myself,
line.
I call myself a recovering perfectionist, as someone
Yeah.
who always wanted to do everything right and have beaten the crap out of myself over it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But it's the beating the crap out of that's the different, right? That's the self-hatred,
Right.
Exactly. Versus just the self-critical and saying, okay, I'm gonna do different next time. So,
Yeah. Well, thank you
it was
so
very
much
nice to chat.
Thank you so much for being on. Appreciate you.
Absolutely.
Keep being you. Thanks so
That
much.
was fun. All right, peace.
Hey guys, I really hope you enjoyed that episode. It takes a lot to put these things together, but I truly love doing it. If you enjoyed this episode or the show in general, and you listen to it on audio podcast, please take some time to give it a review. It would really mean a lot to me. And if you watch the video, please go ahead and just click subscribe and share it with somebody that you think would like it. It would really mean the world to me, and it helps keep the show alive. Visit sebastiannaum.com for more content, and follow me on Instagram at sebnaum. That's SEBNAUM. Thanks again for spending your time with me. I know it is valuable. I hope you have a great rest of the day and week. Till next time.